Good day, students. Today we'll be doing chapter 3, the goods market. So, the outline is the composition of GDP, the demand for goods, the determination of equilibrium outputs, investments equals savings, and government omnipotency, right? So, we will start here, right? When we look at the year to year movements, so basically, when we're looking at the economic activity, right? Across years, maybe from last year and this year, what we are looking at is the changes in demands for the goods and services, the changes in products, and the changes in income, right? So, yeah, they say that the change in demand leads to a change in production, and the change in production leads to a change in income, right? So, what do we mean by this, right? So, think of it in this way. If I am, if I have more income than I did last year. Let's say they increase my salary or they give me a promotion and I have more income than I did last year. I'm most probably gonna want to buy more things. So maybe last year, whenever I would buy clothing items, maybe I would spend 5,000 rand at most, right? Because of the income that I had. But now that I've got more income, I'll most probably maybe now increase to maybe 7,000 or 7,000 rands for clothes, right? So when we have an income increase, so when we have more incomes, right, there's going to be more demand for goods and services. And when there's more demand for goods and services, production will also increase, right? So they basically have positive relationships with each other, right? Now we go to the composition of GDP. So we've been talking about GDP, but now we're getting into it, right? So GDP consists of consumption, which is basically what you and I consume, right? It's the goods and services that we buy. So when we go to shop, right, to buy groceries, that part forms part of consumption. It's basically the households and stuff, right? When we go to hospitals, that is part of consumption because it's services that we are purchasing, right? And then investments are divided into two: your non-residential and your residential, right? So when we talk about investments, we're basically talking about the buying of capital goods, right? So, but we'll get into that more. Yeah, we'll get into that towards the end of the chapter, right? But just note that investments, when we talk about residential investments, just think things like your RDP houses and stuff, your roads in your communities and stuff, you know. And then when we say non-residential, think things like your bridges, your airports, etc. Right? And then we've got government spending. So we all know that we want the government to do things for us, right? We want the government to provide water and sanitation. We want the government to fix our roads. We want the government to give us quality education, etc. Right? But for the government to perform these duties, it has to acquire or has to buy certain goods and services. That forms part of government spending. But then we don't include things like your government transfers. So, what is government transfers? Government transfers is things like your grants, you know, your social welfare, etc. And then we go to exports. So, exports is going out of the country, right? So, this is basically when we produce goods in South Africa, right? Let's say we produce okay, let's deal with our minerals. We know that we have diamonds, gold, etc., right? And then we then export it to other countries. So, for example, like your USA, etc. That would form part of exports. But imports is things that are coming into the country from other countries. So, for example, let's say we are buying from China, right? So that would form part of imports. Think whenever you think of imports, think things like Shein, Amazon, Timu, etc. Right? When we are buying from other countries and we bring it to our country. Right, and then we've got net exports or trade balance. So this is basically the difference between the exports and the imports, right? So when we are taking out more goods, right? Basically, when we are exporting more than we are importing, bringing in goods, we call it a trade surplus because it is a plus. Think of it in this way. You see, for example, with accounting, right? When you have more incomes than expenses, it is a plus, right? It's a surplus, right? So similarly, when we are exporting, right, when we are taking goods to other countries, we get more income, right, from other countries. And then when we are importing, we are giving other countries income, right? So whenever we have more income than what we are giving out, it is a trade surplus. And then if it is less than it, right, then it is a deficit. Right. And then this basically explains that, right? So you see your GDP it consists of your consumption, investments, government spending, net exports. So here net exports is basically there's a difference between net exports and exports. Net exports is basically us saying exports minus imports. But then if you just say exports, then we are referring to this figure over here. Oh sorry. This figure over here. Okay. Then we go on to the demand for goods, right? So demand for goods, basically demand is noted or denoted by the Z, right? Is equal to the consumption. Remember I said what you and I buy, Pick and Pay, ShopRite, etc. Investments, this is the non-residential and the residential. Government spending, right? Exports minus your imports, right? So when we have a closed economy, we have our exports equal to our imports, which is equal to zero. What do I mean by that? When we say closed economy, think of it this way. We've got a closed, we've got a lunchbox, right? So when you put the lid on the lunchbox, there's no way you can put in food or take out food before you open that lunchbox, right? So similarly, when we have a closed economy, right, it is basically us saying that we are not going to be buying any or bringing in any goods from other countries, and we're not going to be taking out goods from the country, right? So because of that, the X being your exports and your imports will equal to zero, right? So in a closed economy, the demand function is Z is equal to C plus I plus G, right? But then if they don't tell you that the economy is closed, then you would work with this, right? Then so consumption has its own calculation, right? So it's a function of disposable income. So I'll explain disposable income as the income that you get after taxes. So you see, for example, let's say your parents, right, bring home 20,000, right? It basically means that that amount that they're bringing is going to be spent, right, on your school fees, your transport, etc., right? Then from that 20,000, right, you're gonna take out some of it and expenses and blah 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 blah. That is disposable income, but that is the income that came after the taxes were deducted. What do I mean by this? Your parents' employer, right? They deduct taxes from your parents' income on behalf of SARS to make it easy for them to pay. So basically, that 20,000 is their disposable income. It's the income that they will dispose or the income that they will spend, right? And then it's a behavioral equation. So it basically says that, or what this means is that obviously when we have, or generally, right, looking at the general or the normal ordinary consumer, right? If my income is more, I'm gonna consume more, right, than when my income was less. right? So that's basically it. Then we move to the calculations. So C, right, is equal to, so remember we said that C is a function of its own. So it's equal to CYD. So it's a function of the disposable income. But now let's get into the actual calculations. So consumption is equal to the autonomous consumption, which is C0. So I'll take it back a little. Autonomous consumption is basically the consumption that you have even when your income is equal to zero. So think of it in this way. You probably know someone that finished matric last year, right? And that is not studying, that is not working or anything, right? So that person, yes, they don't have an income, but they still need to buy toiletries. They still need to eat. So that would form part of the autonomous consumption. It's the consumption that happens of, or the consumption that happens regardless of your income being equal to zero, right? And then plus CYD. YD being your disposable income, right? So C1 is the propensity to consume, right? It's basically the slope of the function, right? And then C0 is a autonomous consumption, right? And we go on to the curve, right? So you'll see your consumption. C0 is what you consume even when your disposable income is zero. So at this point, your disposable income is equal to zero, right? And then the slope is equal to C1, right? And then this is your function basically. Then we go to disposable income. So remember that we said this is how we get our consumption. We say autonomous consumption plus your C1 YD. YD being disposable income. But now we want to calculate disposable income. So disposable income is basically equal to the income that you get minus taxes, right? So then you would then replace this into that equation, and this is what you get: autonomous consumption plus C1, which is the slope or your propensity to consume, and then in brackets y minus t, which is the income minus taxes, right? Then we've got endogenous and exogenous variables. Endogenous, think of it as it's inside. So like we basically get their figures within the model, right? Exogenous are already given, right? So they are outside, they are calculated outside of the model. So we just take them as is, right? And then T and G, so taxes and government spending. Oh, sorry. Taxes and government spending describe fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is basically the policy that we put in place, or the government puts in place whenever they are trying to either stabilize the economy or increase economic growth, right? So, for example, when we want to stabilize the economy, we're most probably going to increase taxes, right? Or when we want to increase, or when we want economic activity to increase, right? We are gonna have more government spending, right? But you will see this in the following chapters. I don't really want to confuse you, but that's basically what this slide is about. Then we move on. So remember that we said we are in a closed economy. So because we're in a closed economy, demand is equal to only your consumption plus your income, which is given, plus your government spending, which is always given. So these two are always given. But what do you calculate? This, right? So now when we replace our consumption, right? The one that we've been calculating, this would basically be our demand curve, right? So when we say there's equilibrium in the goods market, we are basically saying that the incomes is equal to the demand, right? That is the equilibrium condition, and it's very important to state this, because you are most likely going to get a mark for this, right? So now, because y is equal to z, then we can say that y is equal to the autonomous consumption plus your propensity to consume times your income minus your taxes, which in simple terms is your disposable income, plus your investments. And the reason for this bar is basically to say that it is given. You take it as given, right? Plus your government spending, right? So that basically sums it. And then now we now go on, right? So now this is where we at. Yeah, this is where we at. Let me just go back. Right, so now for us to move on to the next step, we need to get rid of the brackets. Remember basic maths? So how do we get rid of the brackets? We're going to multiply this term here by the y and also by the t. So you would have c1y minus c1t. And that's where we how we get to this equation over here. Right, and then now when you reorganize, right, so now remember that we've got a y on the left and on the right. So basic math says the same terms should go to the same side. So now you're gonna transpose this, right? So you're gonna have y minus c1y, right? And then you'll have equals to 0 c0 minus c1 blah 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 blah, right? Then you're gonna factorize it, right? So now you're gonna have a 1 minus c1 y is equal to c0 plus I plus g minus c1 t, right? If you have any questions about this, please do um, note them down. You can send them to the group, or you can DM me, and I will make sure to answer them properly in our context class, so that we can actually do it together, right? And then you're gonna divide both sides by this 1 minus c, because it's on this side. So for us to get one variable, we need to divide, right? And then you get your autonomous spending. So autonomous spending in simple terms is basically this part over here. That is your autonomous spending, right? So you might get a question, what is the autonomous spending? And you're just gonna write it as this, right? Then you get your multiplier. Multiplier is basically, remember we said that we're gonna have this, right? So this is basically your multiplier. This part of the equation is your multiplier, right? It's 1 divided by 1 minus c1, right? And then you can read the rest, right? And then we go on, and now we're gonna see how it is going to be plotted on a graph, right? So on a graph, right, you're gonna have two functions, right? Because remember that this is a function of income rather, right? So you're gonna have two, right? So you've got your production, which is always at a 45-degree angle. Always, it's always like this, right? And then you're gonna have your demand, right? So your demand, there you go. And then this is basically the point of equilibrium, right? So that's when basically your production is equal to your demand. And then, so say that it increases by 1 billion, your demand curve. So if your income increases by 1 billion, right, your demand curve would also increase, right? And remember, I said that when income increases, I'm gonna demand more goods, right? Or I'm gonna want to buy more goods. So therefore, that's basically what's being explained here. Then go on to this. This is just reading. Yeah, it really is just reading. And then yeah, so then we go to private saving. Private saving is basically the saving that we as individuals do, right? So our private saving is basically equal to our disposable income, what we take home minus what we consume, right? Think of it in accounting. When we talk about having, or let's just talk about back in high school or primary, right? If your mother gave you 10 rand for the day, right, and you only spent 5 rand, would say that you saved 5 rand, right? So similarly, in this context, private saving is basically equal to your income or your disposable income, what you are, the income that you're going to use to spend minus what you actually spend, right? That is basically your consumption. Then we go on to um, your investments equals saving, right? So remember we said in equilibrium, this is the function, right? So then we're going to subtract taxes from both sides, right? And then to get our savings equation. So our savings equation is basically savings is equal to investments plus government spending minus taxes, right? Or you can write it like this. And this is the IS relation, the investment savings relation. But very we'll get into this very concept as we are preparing for the test, right? And then so this is basically what happens in equilibrium. Production is equal to demand, right? Investments is equal to saving. And then propensity to save, remember I said is 1 minus the propensity to consume, right? And it's always between 0 and 1. And that basically sums this slide, right? And in terms of government omnipotence or omnipotency, right? The government can never be omnipotent because remember, before the government makes any decisions, right, they really have to think about the people and think of the changes, right? And for example, if the government, like right now, if the government is to say they want to increase VAT, we as the citizens are going to complain and we can literally be like, no, and all of that. So they can never be omnipotent. Omnipotent basically means that a person or in this case the government can say things and it's final and we don't have any say to whatever it has been decided upon, you understand? So no, the government can never be omnipotent. And an example of this is that changing the taxes or government spending is not easy, and all of these other points. That being said, thank you for watching and see you in our next class. Bye.